Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Betty Podcast. I'm your host, Henry. If you're curious about how we learn and adapt to our environment, today's episode is definitely for you. We're diving into the intriguing world of behaviorism, exploring two landmark experiments that significantly shaped our understanding of learning: Pavlov's dogs and Skinner's box. So, let's get started. Behaviorism is a fascinating approach in psychology that focuses on observable behaviors rather than internal thoughts and emotions. Essentially, it's all about how external stimuli affect our actions. Two key figures stand out when we talk about behaviorism: Ivan Pavlov and B.F. Skinner. Their experiments have taught us so much about how environmental factors can shape behavior. Let's start with Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist whose work with dogs has become a classic in the study of behavior. Originally, Pavlov wasn't even focusing on psychology. He was researching saliva and digestion in dogs. During his experiments, he noticed something peculiar. The dogs began to salivate not only when food was presented, but also when they heard the footsteps of his assistant who usually fed them. To explore this further, Pavlov began ringing a bell every time the dogs were fed. After repeating this several times, something interesting happened. The dogs started to salivate as soon as they heard the bell, even if no food was presented. This response is what Pavlov called a conditioned reflex, and the process is known as classical conditioning. Essentially, the dogs learned to associate the bell, a neutral stimulus, with food, an unconditioned stimulus, leading to a conditioned response: salivation. What Pavlov's experiment shows us is the power of association. This has huge implications, not just in psychology, but also in education, advertising, and even our daily routines. Next, let's talk about B.F. Skinner, an American psychologist who expanded on the ideas of behaviorism in a very different way through what's known as operant conditioning. Skinner used a device called the Skinner box to study how animals behave when they can control their environment. In this experiment, Skinner placed a rat inside a box which contained a lever. When the rat accidentally pressed the lever, a food pellet would drop into the box. Over time, the rat learned to go straight to the lever after being placed in the box because it knew that pressing it would result in getting food. Skinner observed that behavior could be reinforced with rewards, hence shaping the rat's actions. Skinner's work helps us understand that behavior can be influenced by the consequences that follow it. This is called the principle of reinforcement. Positive reinforcement, like giving a treat or a compliment, increases a behavior, while negative reinforcement involves removing an unpleasant stimulus to increase a behavior. This concept is incredibly useful in educational settings, parenting, and even self-management. The experiments by Pavlov and Skinner offer valuable insights into how behaviors can be learned and modified. For educators and psychologists, applying these principles can help in design better teaching strategies that reinforce positive behaviors and learning outcomes. For instance, a teacher can use praise, a form of positive reinforcement, to encourage students every time they complete their homework on time, gradually building a habit. Similarly, reducing the amount of homework, a form of negative reinforcement, when students participate actively in class, can also boost engagement. The journey through behaviorism shows us just how much our environment impacts our actions. from Pavlov's dogs associating a bell with food to Skinner's rats learning to press a lever. These studies underline the importance of reinforcement and association in shaping behavior. As we wrap up today's exploration into behaviorism, it leads us perfectly into a fascinating topic for our next episode. Have you ever wondered if emotions, like fear, can be conditioned? We'll explore this through the story of little Albert in our next session. It's a classic study with a twist that raises deep ethical questions. Thanks for tuning into today's episode of the Betty Podcast. I hope you found these insights into behaviorism as fascinating as I do. Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes when we decode how psychology influences our everyday lives. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.